Welcome everyone. My name is Federico and I'm the co-founder of Evmos, which is an EVM, fully interoperable EVM on Cosmos. Today I'm going to be talking and going in a deep dive into the Evmos token model and how we're incentivizing all the different actors in the Evmos ecosystem, and I'm going to also go through the problem statement of why we reach this incentive strategy. And I'm also gonna, this is supposed to be a workshop, so I'm also gonna go through like the different steps in order for you to like create incentives for your smart contracts, the same way that you can create incentives for an LP pool on an AMM, and also how to register developer information for you to share the fee split between developers and users. So the problem, before EIP 1559 was introduced into Ethereum, there was this huge user experience problem where you really didn't know when, if there was a sudden increase in the block space demand on Ethereum, you basically had to pay for way more transaction fees, and so your transaction that you submitted right before this sudden spike in the demand would probably have to wait until like the block of the demand of these block space decreased substantially. So EIP 1559 was introduced as this Ethereum improvement proposal to basically improve the user experience by creating a fee market for all the transactions. So besides also the user experience, there's going to be substantially improved because you have like a constant base fee that is going to be increasing or decreasing depending on the block space demand. You're also going to be making Ethereum as a canonical fee token to pay for fees, because previously there were also like some miners that were accepting, for example, USDC if you went directly through them, and your transaction could be included in their mempools. So yeah, as I mentioned, like there was like this push for EIP 1559 basically to improve the user experience overall in the entire Ethereum ecosystem. So how did like fees work before EIP 1559 was introduced? So beforehand, like the individual or like the user will pay for the fees directly to the miner, and also like the protocol reward was going directly, or the Coinbase transaction was going directly to the miners. And after EIP 1559 was introduced, the base fee was burned. And there was also this concept of the priority tip that was also going directly to the miners in order to speed up the inclusion of your transaction. So there was a constant base fee that was shared across everyone that was sending transactions, and there was like a priority tip if you wanted to speed up, or you didn't have a rush on sending your transaction in the next minute or two. So this is how like the fees previously was split between like the base fee and the priority tip. But the main thing here is that instead of sending this base fee, which was like a huge part of the total fee before this standard was introduced, now it's being burned. And so of course the miners who were getting all these fees directly from the user transactions were not very happy about this. So there was like a huge conflict between like the miners who were trying to push against the EIP 1559 introduction on Ethereum, and also like the developers who were like seen as like the bad actors here because they were trying to improve the user experience and making it like Ether like the fee, like the canonical like economic fee token. So there was like this huge controversy back in early 2021 where some Ethereum miners in one like of the Ethereum magicians like calls were like threatening the entire ecosystem of forking Ethereum if this was finally introduced, and they were like also threatening of like 51% attack to Ethereum in form of protest. And then like also Vitalik was also like getting really involved into this. But in the end, they were right in the sense of like, till March 2022, more than 2 million Ethereum was burned as a result of the introduction of this EIP 1559 implementation, which had huge benefits, but for the miners that were getting all these fees, as I mentioned, they were getting like wrecked in some way because they weren't getting all these fees. So on the other hand, the developers that we're seeing were these like bad actors in the entire ecosystem. Like we're trying to push for the introduction of these implementation of this standard. And there was like also this like whole ecosystem push, and there was like a website that was launched, I support EIP 1559. And like all these like different developer teams were pushing forward because they wanted a better user experience for the entire ecosystem. So, and this was like a screenshot of the website, which is still live. You can go to support.eip1559.org and see all the conflict. And so there was like the community call basically outlining what I just mentioned within this fight of validators, miners and developers. So, so like the whole problem, if we take a step back, like how miners were seeing developers was that they had like a lot of power and influence and alignment with the protocol. But unfortunately, how Ethereum actually worked was that developers were only a small part of the Ethereum community. You have like all the miners, the token holders, the DeFi users that are interacting with the applications, you have the application developers, and you also have like the core developers. So overall, they were like trying to push against a group in the entire Ethereum ecosystem that was not incentive aligned with the entire protocol. So here's what we did in terms of like how to align incentives between developers, validators, and entire users. The question is like, can we do something about it? And that's why Evmos is also introducing the decentralized app store, which is a decentralized marketplace for dApp developers and users where the two can meet together and interact with the applications so that they can share the transaction fees and create revenue for all the users that are aligned in the protocol. So instead of burning the EIP 1559 base fee, we're splitting it between the developers towards the transaction is going to, and also the miners, or in this case, the validators of the Evmos ecosystem. So now we're creating incentive alignment between like the developers that are deploying all these applications, and also the validators who are also still getting 50% of the base fee instead of it getting burned. So the dApp store is a place where like we're creating long-term incentive alignment for decentralized applications, and the entire Evmos ecosystem is going to hugely benefit from creating all these rewards and users for the developers, because previously they were not incentive aligned. So I talked now about like how can we align the developers with incentives directly by splitting the base fee between developers and the validators. But what about the users? They're also a huge part of the Ethereum community. How do we create incentive alignment with them? And that's how we took the approach that a lot of AMMs are using in the entire Ethereum and Cosmos ecosystem by creating usage incentives for the users that are interacting directly with the smart contracts. So the main problem here is that whenever there's like a sudden gas price in one of these like L1s that are also EVM compatible, like the next thing is like, oh, I'm going to create another EVM that is going to be that is going to have like way cheaper gas, and then the next thing is like deploying a bunch of applications and base layer infrastructure so that you can support like the base applications. Like we've seen like all this EVM chain coming and being live in this different L1 ecosystem. But ultimately, like the thing is like instead of doing an incentive program, there should be a long-term incentive alignment for users that is not centralized in a single foundation that is growing in the same way that the protocol is. So you have all these DeFi incentive programs and these liquidity mining programs and all these that provided by all these different foundations on EVM-compatible chains, but how do we turn this into a long-term growth, or how can we ensure long-term growth of the ecosystem if all these like foundations are providing one-way centralized incentive incentives for the applications. So the main limitations of these incentives are that they're not sustainable in the long run. They're usually a one-off, like usually run for a fixed period of time, and then they're gone basically. They're not community-owned because there's only a single foundation. This cherry-picking all the applications that you want to incentivize. So for example, I'm going to incentivize Aave, but I'm not going to incentivize a new really cool application that is deploying in the ecosystem, but no one knows about it. So it's not fully transparent. What are the rubrics and metrics that you're using in order to evaluate which are the applications that are going to be incentivized by these programs? And then these doesn't also reflect on the traction of the deploying and adoption. So for example, when you deploy all these incentives, having a higher TVL doesn't mean that the project is going to have more users. So how do we align this directly with the utilization of the different applications? And that's why we introduce the usage incentive directly into the protocol economic model. So every block that mints tokens, 25% of those newly minted tokens are going directly to usage incentive protocols. So in the same way that you can incentivize an LP pool on an AMM, you can incentivize a smart contract that is voted through governance. Right now, the usage incentives are live, and for example, Diffusion, that is an AMM on Evmos, is currently incentivizing all their users that are interacting directly with their application by providing them like deferred gas rebates in the form of incentives. So the more gas you spend on a smart contract, the more incentives you get. So this is directly going proportional to the utilization of the smart contracts that you're using. So this is ultimately creating a flywheel for the token economic model to create a long-term sustained growth of the entire Evmos ecosystem. Because developers propose new usage incentives to bring more growth into their decentralized applications. So these incentives are driving more users to use their applications and reward them with Evmos tokens. Now, all these users will take these Evmos tokens and spend them on the different dApps and services that are going to be deployed on the Evmos ecosystem. But because we're also splitting 50% of these fees into the developers and the validators, these developers are earning 50% of those transaction fees. So they're also getting more TVL and more usage. So there's like creating a flywheel in the sense that there's going to be like more usage, more incentives to create more usage incentives for the same contracts in the long run. So this is ultimately creating a long-term sustained cycle where you can incentivize all the different types of users. So compared to the picture that I showed you before about the Ethereum ecosystem, Evmos is creating incentive alignment for all the different users of the protocol. So we are incentivizing token holders through staking and liquidity and providing liquidity into the different AMMs on Evmos and the entire Cosmos ecosystem. For DeFi users, we're providing all these usage incentives that I just mentioned. For application developers, they're getting 50% of the base fee for all the transactions that are interacting with their applications. For code developers, they have grants and the community pool. And for validators, they have like the transaction fees and the block rewards directly for providing their validator services. So we're creating a long-term sustained economic growth for the entire ecosystem by aligning all these different users. So we have all these different 3 users, validators, developers, and users, and like all of them are like whack me. So now, like, how do we incentivize these users? Like, how does this work in real life? So the workflow here is like any developer or any user can register their incentive proposal through governance. So they create an on-chain governance mode where they define the contract that they're going to incentivize, the allocation of these 25%. So I want to say, for example, I want 5% of the newly minted tokens on every block to be allocated to my smart contract. Then every week they're going to be distributed to my users, and this is going to last for a duration of, say, 6 months. So that is going on chain, and it's voted by the entire community of Evmos token holders. And if the proposal is approved, then every transaction that is interacting with the smart contract defined on this incentive proposal is going to start collecting gas. So every transaction and every user will have their corresponding sort of like gas pools. So, and after 1 week, the user's gas is going to be prorated with the total amount of gas spent in that contract during that entire week. So, and that is going to be reflected on the Evmos rewards. So you can get a reward proportional to the amount of gas divided by the total amount of gas spent during that week. And now, how can we get developer fees? On the other hand, if you're a developer and want to incentivize and want to start getting 50% of the transaction fees by opting in through a transaction. So, like the developers, specifically the contract deployer, and this is very important because like that's the only way that we can derive the address of the contract is by using the deployer address and the nonce that they provided in the transaction that created that contract. So the contract deployer would submit a transaction with the contract, their address, and optionally they can also define a withdrawal address. So like instead of like them receiving so for example, if you work on a team and you deploy the contract on behalf of your team, you can define the withdrawal address to be, for example, like a DAO that is managed by the entire team, or you can send that to the community pool to further create alignment and like fund new ecosystem development. Or you can deploy that into your usage incentives. So you can define whatever withdrawal address you want for that 50% of the transaction fee to go to. So you can receive it yourself as a deployer, or you can define any address. And then you can define a list of the nonces that you need to provide in order for the contract address to be derived by the deployer address and the nonce. So for example, if you're a single user and you deploy the contract on your own, then you can you just provide one single nonce, or sequence. But if you deployed a contract that is at the same time created like other contracts, so technically a factory contract, you can provide like multiple nonces so that you can derive which is the like that you were the one that deployed the factory contract. That is the way that we have at the moment in order to basically verify that the deployer was the one that deployed the contract itself. So okay, you send that transaction to register your developer fee information. Now, once you send that, you'll start getting 50% of the transaction fees for all transactions, and that is going to be going directly to the withdrawal address that you specified on your transaction. And then, when users interact with the EVM wallet through an EVM wallet like MetaMask with Evmos, in particular to the contract address that you define here, is going to execute the transaction on the EVM, and after the transaction is successful, you're going to be receiving 50% of the fees in Evmos. So that is how it's working in kind of like a lower level. And that's that was a presentation going deep dive into the Evmos token models and how to incentivize contracts and register for developer fees to be split between like developers and users. Any questions or any comments or suggestions?
Can you maybe go over how we can get to their fees?
Yeah. So like right now what is live is the usage incentives. The developer fees are currently on an internal audit. We're doing an internal audit and it's going to be released in like the next few weeks and the next upgrade. But yeah, so you basically send a transaction that is called like register developer fee information, and then you define the contract. The deployer is basically your address that is signing the transaction, so you don't have to provide anything. It's just going to be provided by MetaMask or your wallet. And then you define the withdrawal address. You can leave this out. It's optional. So if you want to define another address or like an address that is managed by your entire team or a Gnosis safe address, you can specify that address here, and then you provide the nonce that you deploy the transaction. So for example, you send like 10 transactions, and on the 11th transaction you deploy the contract. That is your nonce. 11 is your nonce. So the create opcode on Ethereum is using the deployer address, or in this case the sender, and the nonce for the transactions in order to generate the contract address. So you provide both, and then you and then you register your fee.
And to be clear, I get the usage fees of my application.
Yes. So like for example, this is a question that we often get, is like, okay, I have an NAMM, or I have a router contract, or I have like multiple contracts for my application. Which of the contracts I should register? And the question is like the ones that the users interact with. So if you have a router contract, you should use that one instead. If you have, I don't know, like a marketplace, or you have like a proxy contract, you should incentivize that one. So the contract that is basically user facing, that's the one that you should incentivize.
And this is done in the EVM level?
This is done on the protocol level, not on the EVM. It's like on the Cosmos SDK, which is providing additional modularity to the EVM. You can, like, I have the next presentation downstairs that I'm going to go through, like interoperability components, so how Evmos is built using Cosmos and the EVM. But yeah, basically the Cosmos SDK gives us additional functionality to create all these use cases and features that are not possible at the moment in other EVM chains. Yeah. So this is technically interacting with the EVM, which is a module, and then after the transaction is executed on the EVM module, it goes through like a callback that basically distributes 50% of the fees. That's how it works. Any other comments, questions about it? Yes?
I'm curious if you spend thought on, so first of all, it's a really interesting topic, and happy you're presenting.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you incentivize developers, which is really important, to incentivize them to build applications and then you incentivize users to use these applications, like different users. I'm wondering, have you ever thought about people building applications for the sake of building applications to like farm incentives, you know?
Like incentive farming. Yeah, it's a good question. Like we get that a lot because like what if you send or like you spam a contract in order to get all the incentives? But we thought about that and we decided to cap the gains so that you can. It's a protocol parameter. So right now it's set at 120% to incentivize usage, but I think like ultimately it's going to be like 101 or 100% so that you can get up to like 100% of the fees that you spend in that contract back as like a deferred gas rebate instead of like actually making a profit for farming these incentives. So yeah, it's taken into consideration, and there's this parameter in the chain that you can use in order to basically toggle or like modify this. Any other questions regarding like token model, Evmos, interoperability?
It's a broader Evmos question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So you're incentivizing, of course, building on Evmos by your grant program. And we took a look into that. We're building a dApp. So we were considering, by the way, thank you for the airdrop.
Thank you.
Big fan of Cosmos and Evmos, so we thought maybe applying for a grant, and then on the first page it says it's not for salaries. Fine, okay, you made that decision, it's okay. But what's bothering me is, so you get the grant, you lock it for a year, and it's locked as an Evmos tokens, right?
Yeah.
Which basically means in a year the grant could be worth anything between 0 and
a lot, yeah.
Why would anybody apply for such a grant?
This is the short answer is securities law for the grant. You can the grant itself is vesting, but you can still delegate it or use it in different Ethereum applications, but you cannot transfer the tokens to another address. I'll say you cannot sell it, for example, or something like that. But I think like that's gonna be, I mean, we need to revisit all these like things based on user feedback. Right now we had only one or like a few teams that applied that were part of the first sort of like batch. We're currently collecting feedback from them, and this is also one of their concerns, and we're working with our legal team to try to sort of like mitigate it, maybe in the form of a loan or something like that, that we can kind of like circumnavigate also like securities law, because right now it's U.S. securities prevents you from giving or granting Evmos tokens as if it was fiat. Otherwise, you will be like selling a security, and we don't know, and we don't want to be messing up with securities law in the U.S. So it's something that we're, I don't know, studying as a team. Anything else? Cosmos, Wise, Evmos? Oh. Cool. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you enjoy the presentation.